Thank you, Pepe, and thank you for the invite. I usually spend an hour before something like this planning what I'm going to say, and then I stand up and I say something completely different, and I'm not going to make any change from that today. It's been very interesting for the last couple of hours. First of all, listening to the discussion and debate on the legacy of Conley, and then listening particularly to Pepe. I listen to Dahi all the time, so there was nothing interesting in that. But it was interesting listening to Pepe and his observations on the, the role of our new friends, the IMF, and how they've laid waste to the nations of Southern and Central and Latin America. And it's all very depressing, so I think we just go home now, will we? In reality, I've been asked to talk a bit about the sale of state assets, and that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to do so with my trade union hat on. I say that with some pride, because there is much in the trade union heritage and tradition to be proud of. And I say it with much shame, because unfortunately, particularly in the last 25 to 30 years, there is much to be ashamed of. And Pepe is right. We have a lot of advantages here in terms of what we face. We can look at the experiences of Central and Latin America, and indeed throughout the world where the IMF have gone, and we can predict nearly on a month-by-month basis. In fact, they'll help us predict it. They'll write it down for us. What they're going to do, what they're going to insist upon, what steps they're going to want to take in order to keep, as we keep hearing, putting the money into the ATMs. So that's a great advantage. It's great that we can look into that crystal ball and see what's going to happen to us. We have disadvantages as well. And, you know, again, this is where the discussion this morning in relation to Conley becomes relevant. Because the disadvantages are, and I don't want to be provocative, but I'm not going to change the habits of a lifetime now. It seems to me we spent 600, 700, 800 years getting rid of the British in part of this island, and then we forgot how to fight. As a nation, we forgot how to fight. And it seems to me in this part of the island that we replaced the British after all that struggle with what Dahi refers to correctly as the Gombean man. And we'd 70 or 80 years of that, and here we are now. And have we got sovereignty at all now? And I'm just talking about the southern part of the island, for those who consider that that was a sovereign entity in the first place, and there are those who do. Is it sovereign at all now, by anybody's yardstick, by anybody's standard? And clearly it isn't. Clearly it isn't. So we don't have a tradition of fighting in the last 70 or 80 years. We forgot how to do it. And the second problem we've got is we've got probably the most right-wing trade union movement. It's more right-wing than the trade union movement in the United States. People find that hard to believe, but it is. And we've got a Labour Party who are so right-wing, they think the most right-wing Labour trade union movement in Europe is too left-wing for them and they shouldn't be associated with them. And they're in government with Fine Gael. And we're all floundering around, wondering what we're going to do about it. Waiting, as Dahi says, for the day that the knock comes on the door in relation to you can't pay your mortgage for the last 3 months. There's a summons. Or we want your car back. You haven't been keeping up your HP. I had the pleasure in the last few weeks, and again, this I might as well not have this. I had the pleasure in the last few weeks of transporting a lady who was here from Cuba, celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Bay of Pigs, and I was asked to bring her to speak at a meeting in Waterford. And I've been to Cuba several times, and so I know a little bit about the regime there and the revolution. Sorry for using the word regime. It wasn't meant in any disrespect. And it was interesting as we drove to Waterford, and there were all these big houses, you know, 2 acres of land around them, electric gates, 11 cars, 11D cars, or 11KK cars, and then you arrive in this hotel in Waterford, and you know, nothing's any trouble, and everybody's well clad, and you know. And she didn't say it to me because the woman, to be fair, is very politically and highly educated and politically aware. But I wanted to have the debate anyway, so I provoked it. And I says, you're probably looking out here thinking, look at all these riches. She wasn't thinking that at all, but I wanted, as I say, to have a bit of a debate. And I says, we don't have any riches. We don't own any of this. Very few of the houses we are driving past are owned. Very few of the cars we're flying past, we're 2 hours late from me, are owned. Very few of what you see out the window are assets that the citizens of this state own. When I go to Cuba, I see citizens with very little assets. They don't have big cars. They don't have houses with 2 or 3 acres of landscaped gardens around them. They don't wear Levi jeans and Dolce & Gabbana underpants.
How do you know?
At least the ones I met. But what they have, they own. What they have, they own. And what they have, as we all know, is false, in the sense that it's inhibited by an illegal and immoral blockade. So they have very limited resources, as we have. And unlike us, they're not allowed to trade those limited resources. So they have a very, very small GDP. But what they do, with their very limited, immorally and illegally inhibited GDP, is they spread as broadly as possible in terms of education, in terms of health among the citizens of the state. And what did we do? What did we do? We got the wealth. The trade union movement collaborated in the creation of the wealth stroke debt, and we made sure that the gap between those who have and those who haven't in society grew through the 80s, through the 90s, into the noughties, to the day the IMF arrived on the door. And the trade union movement and the Labour Party collaborated in that for 25 years. And none of us done anything about it. Be honest. Well, some of you might do something. But as a nation, as a united workforce, or whatever label you want to put on it, none of us did anything about it. We all might have had a few little battles here and there, but we never got together and fought for our assets, for our independence, for the day when the rainy day would come. And by God, the rainy day is coming. We're now in a perfect storm. Now, I'm very privileged and very lucky. I, by some combination of factors, have found myself representing the workers in ESB. And they're very privileged and very lucky as well. You wouldn't know it listening to some of them some of the time, but they are very privileged and very lucky. There's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with workers being privileged and lucky and looked after. Not to be knocked at all. But they are very privileged and very lucky, and I'm very privileged and very lucky to speak and act and represent them. And we find ourselves in a situation now where the government, egged on by the IMF, not really having that totally. I know the IMF want to do it, Pepe, but let me tell you something, Fine Gael want to do it as well, even if there was no IMF. And let me tell you something else, there's elements in the Labour Party want to do it as well, even if there was no IMF. But there is, and there's an ECB and there's an EU, the people who told us we couldn't fish our waters anymore, we couldn't farm our land anymore, but don't worry, we'll give you a few bob to build roads. They're now telling us as part of this perfect storm that they're going to have our state assets as well. They're going to take them, they're going to sell them. And Pepe will tell you, that's what they do. There's nothing we can do to stop it. Even fighting people, like the people of Central and Latin America, couldn't stop it. So how are people who've got lazy in the last 70 years like us going to stop it? So it's going to happen. Unless something historic. Now we can go on Congress and say we need something historic, and they tell us we'll have a march So we pick a location, pick the Dáil. Congress have the way, pick the Dáil when there's no one sitting in the Dáil. In case one of the marchers happens to bump in to one of the goons and say something inappropriate, and they'll end up on the front page of the Evening Herald. So we'll have a march to a parliament with nobody in it, and we listen to speeches from the people who collaborated with Fianna Fáil in the economic destruction of this country for the last 25, 30 years. And then we go down to Dohenny and Nesbitt's. We'll have a few pints, and we'll go home and we'll feel good about ourselves for a couple of hours. We wake up the next morning and everything will be just the same. We'll still be, excuse me girls, fucked. The Greeks had marches. Fair play to them. They had great marches. They bumped cars and stuff. Smashed up a few buildings. They do it in London as well, regularly. I think they just do it in London for crack. Doesn't mean they're any better off in terms of fighting for an equal and fair distribution of wealth or for the retention of their assets than we are. They're just better at organising marches than we are. But that doesn't cut it either. That doesn't cut it either. It might cut it as part of an organising strategy and tactic, as a means to an end. But as an end in itself, it's not going to do anything. So, throw into this perfect storm, I'm only picking on you, Pepe, because you're beside me. Throw into this perfect storm the most right-wing government, never mind the Labour in it, still the most right-wing government. Read the programme for government. The most right-wing government with the biggest majority any government has had in the history of the statelet. Throw that into the mix of the perfect storm. So if you weren't depressed after Pepe, you're probably ready for the Prozac at this stage. I'm just a trade union official. And I'm very lucky because I've got a job. It's a good job. Good job because it pays relatively well. Not the sort of figures reading the paper, but I'm okay. And I like it. I don't be lying in bed at night thinking, oh, jeez, I have to go to work tomorrow. I like it. I'm lucky. People I represent are lucky. And the people I represent have power. Real power. In every sense. Real power. And that's an opportunity. That's a real opportunity for someone somewhere to say, stop. Enough's enough. But I've got a problem with the people that I represent who have power. Because they also have money. They're also, and they won't mind me saying this because I say it to them often enough, they're also spoiled. Because for the last 20, 25 years, when they were building this, and building that, and building the other, the thing that the right wing, Fianna Fáil, PD governments needed, once they got the unions in their back pocket, the thing they needed the most was industrial peace. And the way they got that is to throw a bit of gravy around the place. A bit of overtime here. This thing in ESB called after hour schemes, it'll take me an hour to explain it to you. Gravy. So people who work at good jobs, were always good jobs, suddenly are in great jobs. Not only have they got the house, the mortgage is paid off, they're buying an apartment in Bulgaria, and they've got 2 or 3 cars. Kids are maybe going to private school, universities, fee paying. And I'm going around thinking, I know what Pep is after saying, this is 3 years ago. Because somebody told me in the banking sector 3 years ago, somebody who I respect because I respect their knowledge. I'm telling you what, Brendan, the IMF are coming in here, I've seen the figures, the IMF are coming in here. It's going to take a year, it's going to take 2 years, the IMF are coming in here, and I was thinking, this guy's usually right. So if the IMF come in here, what have the IMF done everywhere else? And I was up on a meeting in Letterkenny. There was about 50 or 60 ESB members at the meeting in Letterkenny one night. And they were giving out a bit this or that, because the gravy started to dry up a bit now, you know. So they were giving out a bit this or that or the other, and we went through all of that. And then I says, listen, I believe this country is bushed. I believe the IMF are going to come in. And I believe people in your housing estates are going to be losing their jobs before you're going to be losing yours. And your brothers and your sisters and your aunts and your uncles are going to be losing their jobs. And people are going to be losing their houses and losing their cars. And our job is to protect your job, your employment, and then to marshal it in such a way that if they come and attack us, there's some sort of fight back. Because you guys have the power to fight back. And they looked at me as if I was mad 3 years ago. I was up there a couple of months ago. And they don't look at me as if I'm mad now. They look at me now as if, how do we fight? What do we do? Because they've forgotten. Like we've all forgotten. So, when I heard the IMF was coming in, I thought, oh, Jesus. I know the way I thought about it, and I thought, great. Great. I know what they're going to do now. But 6 months after they did it in Greece, they're going to want to sell the ESB. That's what they're going to do. And if I know that's coming, I've got about a year and a half now to start explaining that to the ESB lads, and let's get a shop steward movement going, and let's get a situation where the lads will put up a fight. And if we put up a fight in ESB, and it's hard to get them to fight, but we're getting there. If we put up a fight in ESB, the lads will start to believe they can actually affect change. And if they start to believe it, their mates and their brothers and their sisters elsewhere, they'll say, oh, this actually works. So what does having a fight in ESB mean? First thing you get is, we can't do it. We still have power stations. It won't make any difference. We turn out the power stations. There's another power station, that's correct. But there's no electricity ever went from a power station to that light bulb. So we control that. So what I envisage in the next few months, or hope to see in the next few months, Colin McCarthy, brilliant. Not only did he say they should sell it off, but he made a bollocks of the report. Can't add. So that's a great argument, a great advantage that we've got. So from our point of view now, we're coming after the state assets. Coming after all your assets. Your houses, your cars, your loans, your credit card balances. Coming after the whole lot. We can't all, you know, maybe we can, it'd be great if we could. We can't all coalesce around, you know, some house on a community basis. Maybe that's the sort of thing we need to start doing. But in terms of coming after the state assets, all they're going to do is get a few billion for it and give it to the banks, give it to the investors, give it to the speculators. We'll be left with nothing. So the trade union movement has the potential, despite everything I've said about them, to coalesce around an issue or a number of issues. And what I would hope the left, because you hear a lot of this thing of the left in Ireland, bloody left in Ireland's all over the place. I would hope that the best thing the right in Ireland have going for them is the left. So I would hope that the left, and I say that as I'm not aligned to any party, I would hope that the left, whatever part of the left it is, would say to each other, listen, we're all going down the tubes. Either we're going to help to rebuild a society that we fought for 700 or 800 years on the basis of principles whereby we distribute the wealth in the fairest way possible. And either we're going to look at this crisis as an opportunity to begin to do that. And that's going to require radical action. It's going to require more than marches. It's going to require more than good marches, burning cars and smashing up buildings. It's going to require militant, industrial action, no holds barred, and so maybe they'd sell us in the fucking dark. But at least let's put it up to them. And in 2 or 3 years' time, or 10 years' time, or 20 years' time when I'm retired in Cuba, having my cigar, drinking my rum, enjoying life. He doesn't believe I'm going. In 20 years' time, at least as a movement, as a left, let's say, either we took them on, you know, had some success, maybe total success, maybe turned things around somewhat, or at least we took them on and had a bloody fight. Because there's lots of flags around this room, and they're all great flags. And, you know, they all have a history, they all have an ideology, they all have concepts behind them. The flag we've become most accustomed to in this country is the white flag, with nothing on it. So, that's all I have to say. Sorry if any of that was provocative, but thanks very much for being here.